What is it? Zero option that. Zero.
Hi everybody, we're going to start now. My name is Chelsea Mooney, and I am the chair of this panel, and I will also be presenting. Thank you everybody for being here. And thank you, LSA, obviously, for having us here to share our work with each other. So I'm going to start by reading out the papers that we'll be hearing about today. And I ask that each panelist please give us a brief introduction of yourself, 1 or 2 sentences. We each have 12 minutes. I will let you know when you have 5 more minutes, and then when it's time, I will wave this up. Hopefully, well, Rebecca can't see us, but for Rebecca, I will say you have 5 minutes left, if that's okay. So the first work that okay. Hi, Rebecca. Okay. So we will be hearing, the first paper we'll be hearing about is the visual works of Yinka Shoninare. Okay, so this is the typo. Okay, Yinka Shonibare and Victor Ekpo as African Cultural Vehicles by Azizat Aziz from Olabisi Onabanjo University. And then The Generational Traits in Western Nigerian Cultures, a study of mural art and identity by Olabode Bankole from the Thai Solarian University of Education. Locating Satire in Thomas Ona's Sculptures by myself from Emory University. Nigeria Cultural Identities in Contemporary Welded Sculpture by Tolulope Subuwale from Olabisi Onabanjo University. And Reconstituting a Nigerian Artistic Identity in Former Biafra, Artists at the University of Nigeria in the 1970s by Rebecca Wolf. So we are going to start with our first paper, whenever you're ready.
Good morning. My name is we got to stand up.
Or do you want to sit here?
No, I think I'll just stand. Events.
All right, I'll start my paper with my timer whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'll start now. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Aziz Azizat, a recent graduate of Olabisi Onabanjo University and the first art historian in Olabisi Onabanjo University Fine and Applied Arts Department. So, thank you. So I'll be presenting the paper, The Visual Works of Yinka Shonibare and Victor Ekpo as African Cultural Vehicle. All right, so we're talking about the issue of identity and the issue of identity. Art has always, and art has been one of the forebearers of African identity. You can't say any African without looking at their art. Their art talks about their history. You will know an African identity through its artworks. So African art has long served as a powerful vehicle for cultural expression, showcasing diverse narrative and perspective. Over the centuries, African art has transcended geographical boundaries and found its way into different parts of the world through the African diaspora. Artists has continuously offered distinctive perspective on the lives, challenges, and achievements of different cultural communities through the artistic expression. Now, the Nigeria diaspora, yes, we have this trending syndrome of Japa, where people have to, we have a lot of Nigerians moving over the globe, traveling, going out. So, but one thing you've seen is that the Nigerian diaspora, they have produced a thriving community of artists who have gained global recognition for their creative talent. Many Nigerians living abroad have continued to draw inspiration from their cultural heritage, infusing their work with distinct Nigeria influences. Few examples of this diverse array of Nigeria diaspora artists making their marks in the field, from fine arts to literature to popular music. Especially in the music, we've seen most of the Nigeria artists out there, like Burna Boy winning Grammys and all that. So same thing with arts. You've seen there are so many Nigerian diaspora artists out there producing their work, and not just producing their work because they are already in America or British. They are producing their work, infusing African, Nigerian culture, infusing the cultural heritage in their work. So today, my paper is talking about contemporary artists named Yinka Shonibare and Victor Efo, and how they continue this tradition using their visual work to explore themes of identity, history, and society through a unique lens. So the first artist I'll be looking at is Victor Efo. So Victor Efo is a Nigerian-American artist now based in Washington, D.C. He is internationally renowned for his paintings, drawings, sculptures, which reimagine the ancient Nigeria communication system, the INCBD, to create his own unique language. Victor Efo derives his creative artistic inspiration from different sources because he's a member of this, he was a member of the honor group, which the honor group, their main ideology is to use what's the name called, to use Nigeria indigenous indigenous Yoruba or indigenous, yes, Yoruba or even other culture. You see it in their artworks. Same thing with Victor Ekpo. He's an Igbo man, so his works are based on the Igbo mythology and symbolism. He has explored different Igbo folklore, traditional artistic practice. His works are characterized by the use of vibrant color, intricate pattern, and symbolic imagery that draw upon the visual image of the Igbo culture. Please continue. This is that image. Back to the image, please. No, the first one. Yeah, the image. These are the Insibidi. These are this Uli and Insibidi language. These are their sign and symbols. So these are what he incorporates in his work. These are what he used in his to produce his artistic expression. Please continue. So I'll be looking at one of his work titled "Child." The next slide, please. Yes, titled "Child." This symbol is, as you can see, looking at the symbols, that same image I showed earlier, you can see it incorporated in the part of this artwork. This artwork is a aquabal doll from Ghana. It's an aquabal doll. It symbolizes the state of loneliness in the world of this innocence getting corrupted. The innocent mind of a child. The image is, the artwork is titled "Child." It's has to do with how nowadays through social media and all that, you've seen the different young people minds are getting corrupted by what's happening out there. So Victor Eco has his work now cuts across varieties of everyday items, which display striking Afrocentric details. Some of his works are clothing. Yes, he started working on clothing, mugs, tote bags. Please, the images, that's it. Yes, as you can see, tote bags, mugs, next image also. Yes, and phone cases. He keeps infusing this African inspired style so that these customers now incorporate this into their daily life, fostering a greater appreciation and representation of the continent's rich creative tradition. So that's that about Victor Eco. And the next artist is Yinka Shonibare. He is a British Nigerian artist whose work has gained international acclaim for his thought-provoking exploration of cultural identity, colonial history, and the lasting impact of globalization. Often seen in iconic drawings, paintings, sculptures, photographs, film, and installation. A significant element of his work is the use of this doctoral print fabric produced by means of a batik-like technique. This vibrant pattern fabric, often associated with African culture, was actually mass-produced in the Netherlands and exported to Africa during the colonial era. By incorporating this material into his sculptures, he has subverted the international narrative surrounding cultural ownership and authenticity. So looking at his works, please go down. Yes, one of his works, Free Free Like a Bird. Let me go back to the image, the next image, please. Yes, Free Free Like a Bird. As you can see, his sculptural installation, you can see the Dutch West African print. Is that what he used for the horse and the female sitting on it? And the globe there, the title is Free Free Like a Bird. It reflected an image of a female riding on a horse. This artwork is talking about the the cage at the back are birds. She's trying to free birds. Same thing with African activists, and you're talking about the challenges faced by the challenges faced by African out there. So throughout his recent practices, Shonibare has maintained his commitment to impending cultural influences and inviting viewers to question accepted narratives, whether through imposing sculptural forms or thought-provoking conceptual pieces. The artist continued to position himself as a leading voice in the global discourse on post-colonial identity and the legacy of empire, which can be seen in some of his recent works, Women Moving Up, the next image, please, and Monument of the Mind and Soul. Yes, this particular artwork is one of his current recent work. The image of the man there is of Sir Roman, yes, Harry Rawson, the naval officer that was involved in the Benin expedition in the 1897. So he represented the person with Dutch wash print, and over at the sides are the stolen artwork, the stolen artifacts of this time, like the Benin, the king, that plague, and the queen, up there, the image is not so clear. So that's Yinka Shonibare. He continues to, his artworks provoke thoughts on mostly post-colonial history. He tried to bring up topics of history that has happened to Africans and the history of Africans then. So, please, in conclusion, Yinka Shonibare work and Ekpo work has served as a powerful testament to the diversity, complexity, and richness of contemporary African art, inviting viewers to explore the multifaceted layers of African identity and cultural expression through their visually captivating creation. As their influence grows, Nigerian artists in the diaspora plays a vital role in shaping the artistic discourse on a global scale by embracing the past, celebrating its present, and supporting its future. We can continue to appreciate the rich cultural heritage and artistic contribution of the African diaspora. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. Hello, next speaker.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to first acknowledge, or I would like to present my paper, Generational Traits in Western Nigerian Culture, Study of Moral Arts, and a study of moral arts and identity. Well, before I go into the presentation proper, I would like to acknowledge my professor, Professor Biodu Banjo, who's been supporting me in proofreading, and my other lecturer, Dr. Sam Adekoya, and Bankole Olabode, PhD Taswe. Now, concerning this paper, the introduction, we are studying the aim to explore the generational traits in Western Nigeria. The basis of this presentation is, as a painting major, it's in a bid to promote painting as an aspect of art, more also the monumental emblems that are involved in painting, because in most cases, painting are not just done ordinarily. They come with messages. And in the messages, there are semiotic representations and presentations in the messages. So the research paper examines general traits in Western Nigerian cultures, specifically through the lens of moral arts. It implores how these traits are represented in moral arts and how they impact identity and culture. The research, excuse me, I have issues with it too. Okay, sorry. I have issue with my media. So, okay, let me go. Okay, so, okay, I have it here. Okay, so it employs how the traits are represented in moral arts, how they impact identity and culture. The research draws on a range of sources, including interviews with moral artists, observations of moral artists, and analysis of relevant literatures. These traits have a significant impact on identity, both for individuals and for the wider community. The study also highlights the importance of understanding the relationship between art and culture and the role of art in shaping social and cultural change. The paper expatiates that moral art has the tool for social change, that the use of public art to explore generational traits can be a valuable tool for understanding and addressing issues of identity, culture, and heritage. It also raises questions about the role of art in promoting social cohesion. Now, when we talk about culture and identity, we have had issues where you have people from races, so to say, let me use Yoruba, and let me emphasize in Lagos and Ogun to be precise. You will see a Lagosian tending to create conflict, fighting an Ogun State person. But in actual sense, Lagos itself, a major component of Lagos is the migrant of Ogun. The same between Lagos and Edo. They are migrants of Edo. But something in these topics helps us to emphasize more on the fact that there is much relevance between Edo and Lagos, and also between Ogun and Lagos. Let me use Edo as a case study. In Edo zone, you find out that when the king of Lagos, Oba of Lagos, is in full regalia, if you analyze the regalia, the composite of that regalia is similar to Edo. The staff, the sword, is Edo sword. Now, the unique using of white color, Oshun, Edo too uses white color. And those are the emphasis, those are the semiotic examples that this research is going to emphasize on and make us know and see the importance of this topic. Now, we also look at generation. In terms of generation, there are some of us. Take, for example, I have never seen Taisho Larin physically before. But as I was growing up, I came across his pictures and his dressing, his unique dressings and everything. I came across it. And I had mastered the unique dressing very well until I came across it on the walls in Ogun State. If you remember, there are some bridges in Ogun State where his pictures are there. So I was able to see his face and I did research and I affirm it, that is who he is. But in order of time, let me quickly go to the area of study. The area of study is going to study on Western Nigeria, which consists of Lagos, Ogun, Oyo, Osun, Ondo, and Ekiti. The conceptual clarification will deal with values of these paintings and artworks. It's going to deal on beliefs of these paintings and artwork, and also the attitudes. Permit me to explain that a little. Some of these paintings, some people see it as ordinary painting, but to be candid, it actually gives message to every strata of human beings, both the young, the middle-aged, the elderly, the old. It talks to them. To some people, it's nostalgic in nature. To some people, it teaches. To some people, it's historical. I remember in our early days of academics, we used to have a sculpture in the center of our school, a sculptural piece. And the sculptural piece we used to have in the center of our school, some people came with this mythic belief that the sculpture moves and reacts based on who you are and your actions at midnight. And so for those who believe, so for those who believe in such, they are likely going to be corrected by that. And more also, paintings as well. There are most of the paintings teaches us and guides us on where to go. For example, if you come across the paintings on the entrance wall of the Emir of Kano's palace, it talks a lot about Arewa. And significantly, we have those logos in our Naira, initial Naira notes, currency in Nigeria. And so it goes to tell you the dominance of the Arewas, which are the houses in Nigeria, and several other ones. And until we now have the 50 Naira note, which is called Wazobia, that has the three sects of Nigerian people. That is the Igbo, the Yorubas, and the Hausa. So if I take the 50 Naira note to somewhere like Australia, and I display that note, somebody who comes across that note can have a brief idea, a brief history through analysis of who we are in Nigeria. Because of time, I have less than, let me quickly go to summary. The research identified three generations in Western Nigeria, each with distinct cultural values, beliefs, and identity. The traditional generation, pre-colonial era, was characterized by a strong cultural identity and a deep connection to traditional practices and beliefs. The transitional generation, colonial era, experienced a significant shift in cultural values and beliefs, with the influence of Western culture leading to a decline in traditional practices. The modern generation, post-colonial era, has seen a resurgence of interest in tradition, cultural practices, and a desire to reconnect with cultural heritage. Let me go to recommendations because of time. Based on the finding of the study, the following recommendations are made. Sorry. Good. Preservation of traditional cultural practices. Efforts should be made to preserve traditional cultural practices and values in moral art to ensure the continuation of this important art form. Cultural education and awareness. Cultural education and awareness programs should be implemented to ensure that future generations understand and appreciate their cultural heritage. Support and funding. Support and funding should be provided for moral art programs and initiatives to ensure the continued development of this art form. Community engagement. Community engagement and participation should be encouraged in the creation and preservation of moral arts to ensure that the art form remains relevant and meaningful to the community. Digital preservation. Digital preservation methods should be explored to ensure the long-term preservation of cultural art and to make the art form more accessible to a wider audience. Thank you for listening.
Yes. Thank you. So like I said at the beginning, my name is Chelsea Moni. I am a PhD candidate in art history at Emory University. So today I will be speaking with you all about one artist, Thomas Ona Odulate. We can actually go to the next slide. Thank you. So Thomas Ona Odulate was a Yoruba wood carving artist in the early and mid 20th century. According to existing scholarship, Ona first started his practice in Ijebu Ode and then later moved on to Lagos, where he made these wood sculptures that he sold to different foreigners and Europeans in the city. Next slide, please. So his works, as we can see here, depicted people in different social and professional dispositions. So we have a woman that's sitting down. We have a district officer, there's an Oba there, and there's a judge, amongst others. These are just like a few examples of the kinds of works he was making. So these works were popular amongst Europeans who interpreted Odulate's work as caricatures and satire. So in other words, these Europeans thought that Odulate was making fun of them, that he was mocking them. And so even though Odulate said he was just representing the world as it existed around them, this idea of his work as satirical and caricature still exists today, and it influences how we understand the artist today. Next slide, please. So here I have a screenshot from an article, one of the earliest articles and possibly the earliest article written about Odulate. It's written by the American anthropologist William Bascom, and it was published in 1957. So as we can see here, the article is titled Modern African Figurines, Satirical or Just Stylistic. And so I want to point our attention to one specific line in the bottom screenshot where Bascom says, Mr. Ona himself was a Yoruba, but this was obviously not traditional, serious Yoruba art. It was made not for Africans, but for Europeans. And so Bascom's point is that we cannot really consider Odulate's work as serious Yoruba art because he was making it to sell to Europeans. Next slide, please. So today, Odulate's work can be found in various institutions in the US and Europe, and I will find out soon, Nigeria as well. I need to go to the National Museum and, move around Nigeria to find out where his works are in the country. But so these are a few of the institutions. We have the Minneapolis Museum of Art, Yale University Art Gallery, Emory, where I am, the Fowler Museum at UCLA, the British Museum, and NOMA, which is in New Orleans. So there are many gaps in our knowledge about this artist, due in part to limited, readily accessible archival information, as well as the reliance on what I will call the single authoritative voices of a small number of art historians, collectors, and curators who have written about Odulate. And so in my research, I engage closely with the formal and technical qualities of these sculptures as I think critically about the artist's personhood and the ways in which he negotiated identities with different people, patrons, and individuals around him. I consider alternate methods of approaching archives while also paying close attention to the kinds of evidence used by art historians and scholars to think about his work as satirical and quote unquote non-traditional Yoruba art. So I'm asking, what is the evidence that we're using to make these claims? So finally, I demonstrate how the current ways of understanding Odulate's sculpture continue to place him within a dichotomy of authentic African art and tourist African art, two categories that are heavily debated in the field of African art history. By centering Odulate's personhood and thinking about his experiences, my dissertation project advances ongoing efforts in African art history to complicate what we know about African artists and to think specifically and with nuance about singular African people. So I'm making the, please, let's go back, please. I will let you know when to move, thank you. So I'm making the broader case that we have to think about African artists with individuality and specificity rather than just saying, that's African art. So next slide, please. Over the last few months, I have been working with two conservators, Renee Stein and Brittany Dolph-Deneen, at the Michael C. Carlos Museum at Emory University, where I am, to conduct a technical analysis of this sculpture. So according to two African art historians who have studied the sculpture depicts a member of the Yoruba political institution known as Oshugbo or Ogboni. And according to limited provenance information, we think that the sculpture was made sometime before 1940. So we don't really have any specific information. So next slide, please. Thank you. So with the help of Renee and Brittany, I was able to conduct what we call an elemental analysis using a machine called a handheld X-ray fluorescence spectrometry device, which measures the energy levels at which different elements in the sculpture fluoresce. And so as you can see here, we studied the white paint in one of the eyeballs. We studied like underneath of the clothing of the base of the sculpture. We studied the midsection and the small platform that the sculpture is standing on. Next slide, please. So these are the results from the elemental analysis that I conducted. So I will admit that the results are much more legible to conservators like Renee and Brittany than they are to me as an art historian. But this is the result of the right eyeball specifically, and we found out that it contains titanium and calcium. And so these are used to make a paint called titanium white. And titanium white was invented at some point in the 1920s. And so now if we know that the sculpture was made at some point before 1940, and through the elemental analysis that I conducted, we know that it was made between 1920 and 1940. Of course, 20 years is a lot of time, but it still offers us more specific information than we knew before. So next slide, please. African art historians like myself and like many people in this room have to contend with this kind of lack of specificity all the time, especially when we're studying historical African art. In the case of this particular sculpture, we're not even sure if it's Odulate who made the sculpture. So here I have a screenshot from an exhibition catalog from 1980 that was written by the respected scholar of Yoruba art and sculpture, Henry Jewell. And so this sculpture that I'm studying was part of an exhibition at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. And Henry Jewell, as we can see here, Thomas Ona Odulate, question mark. So Henry Jewell is not sure that this work was actually made by Odulate. And on the second line, he says, this large figure may be a pre-1940 work by the master Odulate before he moved to Lagos. So there's a lot of speculation, and Henry Jewell is being very transparent that actually we're not very, very sure about this information. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, all of this very helpful speculation that Henry Jewell is doing becomes transformed into fact on the Carlos Museum website. So this is a labeled text about the information. So you see where Henry Jewell is questioning whether Odulate made this artwork. Here it becomes attributed to Thomas Ona Odulate. So that speculation is transformed into fact. The date is before 1940, and then I've underlined the last paragraph, which says the sculpture was likely made before Odulate moved to Lagos, given its large scale, heaviness, and depiction of Yoruba subject. So the sculpture, like this sentence is indicating, is quite large compared to other Odulate sculptures. It's almost 1.5 meters tall, so it's very big considering that the artist is making works that are 3 inches long, 3 inches tall. But here again, it makes it seem as though Odulate for sure made this work. And we don't know that actually, right? Part of my research is finding out, did he make this work or did he not make this work? And that allows us to think about this artist with specificity. So this brings us to a number of problems about the dissemination of information in African art history. Importantly, this presentation of information as facts transforms what Jewell was saying into a single authoritative voice because it reinforces the idea that there is one fact about African art, even when we're not sure whether it's a fact or not. So now to be very clear, I'm not denying that the sculpture was not made by Odulate. Rather, I'm trying to say we don't have evidence. We have someone who's suggesting that it was made by him, and then scholars coming after that saying, oh no, it was for sure made by him. But no one has actually interrogated the work, spent time with the work to figure out whether it was made by him or not. And that becomes dangerous when we're talking about African history because it removes specificity. It just says, okay, this looks like this, so it's made by this person, right? And that's not fair to our histories. So I have another example of this thing as I still have a bit more time. Can we please go to the next slide? So this is a sculpture of Queen Victoria, and it was potentially, again, made by Odulate. Let's go to the next one. This is another sculpture of Queen Victoria, and it's, again, attributed to Odulate. So if you note, there's huge differences between the previous sculpture and this sculpture. And once again, I'm not saying that an African artist cannot make different works. Rather, I'm saying there's actually no evidence to say it was made by this person. And the Queen Victoria sculptures are very interesting because if we move to the next slide, I'm sorry, I edited my slides and clearly they didn't translate to this. But the next slide, please. So here we have 3 Queen Victoria sculptures. The first one is the one I just talked about that has been attributed to Odulate. The second one, which is very, very similar, is at the Fowler Museum of Art in UCLA, and it's not attributed to anybody yet. And the third one is also at the British Museum, and it's not attributed to anybody. And so the interesting fact about these 3 sculptures is they were bought in the same auction lot, meaning they were together. Meaning that when we date the provenance history to find out where they're from, there is a point where all of these 3 sculptures come together. And so the questions I'm asking is, why were they sold together? Where did they come from? And how come we have one sculpture being said, being attributed to one artist and the others are not? Specifically, I'm very interested in how those first 2 sculptures are very nearly identical. There's small differences between them, but one of them is Odulate and the other one is not. So these are the kinds of questions that I'm looking for and parsing through in my dissertation. And I'm out of time. Thank you. We have our next presenter, who is Lulupe.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to see you here as my audience. My name is Tolulope Oladimeji Shobowale. I teach sculpture and art history at Olabisi Onabanjo University. The title of my paper to be presented before you is Nigeria Cultural Identities in Contemporary Weathered Metal Sculpture. One of the fascinating things that is happening is that in art generally, things like what this last presenter have just said seems a bit confusing. And the truth of the matter is because as people are conscious of one thing or the other. And in my paper, where I am going is simple. When we are looking at sculpture generally, particularly the traditional ones, they are heavily loaded with our cultural identity. And when we come to modern art, that is diminishing from our current works. However, one of the fascinating aspects of weathered metal sculpture in Nigerian art of today is the reflection of socio-cultural identity of the producers, which has continued to flourish till date, despite the artist's interaction and embracement of global influence. This cultural romance in modern art form started in 1957 among formerly trained artists through the Zaria art students. Who are these Zaria art students? They were the first set of visual art students in Ahmadu Bello University who rebelled against the imposition of Western art forms imposed on them by their foreign lecturers. And because of this, they were led by Uche Okeke, who engineered other students to dump the idea of Western arts and embrace a good aspect of their socio-cultural background. And because of this, they presented their works to their lecturers the way they wanted it, not the way the lecturers wish them to work. And because of this, they slammed them rebel. The effort of these Zaria students led to emergence of new visual art forms, which eventually metamorphosized into an art movement in Nigerian art institutions. As the thing continues to grow, these Zaria students majorly were painters. Sculptors were not among them. And Elie Serimona is a product of Zaria. So when he get to Auchi in 1979, the revolutionized mind in him from Zaria propelled him to encourage the students to create a phenomenon. You have to start doing something new, because as at that time, Auchi School is already known for their expressionistic and colorist painting, with emphasis on the use of color rather than forms that can be linked with the student's sociocultural background. So the students of Erimana agreed with him to explore their sociocultural background in their images. And with this, I would like to tell us what is sculpture. Sculpture is a plastic art produced in different forms. It could be in three-dimensional art, it could be in relief, and it is executed using different types of media: stone, wood, clay, ivory, and in recent time, metal. So weathered metal sculpture can be defined as a means of exploring metal creatively for figurative and non-figurative purposes, using direct construction, assemblage, mold, direct guided techniques, or any of these combinations. The pioneering creative weathered metal sculpture in Nigeria is that saxophonist, produced by an AOND student of Yaba College of Technology in 1963 by Sir Victor Waifo. And later, the one beside it is at the conference center of Obafemi Awolowo University, titled Faces at Conference. It was executed in 1977 by Professor Agbofolani. If you look at the gap between that and this, you can see there is a huge gap. So that is the reason why Erimona encourages his students. We cannot continue in the past. If you look at the saxophonist, you can't link it with Nigerian culture compared to the faces who carried a lot of facial mask in our culture, at least from the southern part of Nigeria. Erimona students succeeded in coming up with something new as instructed by their lecturer. This new form, according to Erimona, was termed phenomenal sculpture. Next slide. This phenomenal sculpture emerged in 1981 through a student who is a graduate of the school. He's an HND student who executed his own project exploring weathered metal sculpture. So, next slide. The first one is Durandor's work in 1981, which pioneered exploring weathered metal sculpture in the open garden. And since that, there are other students after him took the bull by the horn in continuing in his form. And the next one, now you can see this next one is a music maker, obviously from the eastern part, either eastern part of Niger, delta part of Nigeria. That work really exhibited our culture. Even the first one by Durandor, the angularity of forms is one of the characteristics of Yoruba and African culture. And with that, others are following him. The next slide. We can see different forms of work executed in metal, and every one of it is speaking about our cultural background, the Eyo, the Ekombi dance, the Obitin dance from Ondo, the Arugungu, the Bata drummer, and the Edu that are the same. So, going by the aforementioned, This study aims to look into the forms and thematic foci of some purposely selected weathered metal images with a view to situating the works in their cultural identity in Nigerian art. Research methodology, primary and secondary sources will be relied on. I'm going to use historical, formal, and contextual in bringing out my point. And findings will surely show, as we can see from those images, that the selected works are not art for art's sake, because what I mean by art for art's sake means for beautification alone. But they are not for beautification alone because they still reflected our culture. So when you see those images, it informs you about the producer's culture, what they do, and who they are. So the sculpture shows the rich cultural diversity of Nigerian people and promote it beyond the shore of the country. Thank you.
So we have a last speaker from Blue. Professor, do you good? Oh, she's not even there. Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, yeah, I can.
Okay, so I will let you know when you have 5 minutes, and then I'll just let you know when it's over.
Okay, and I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. All right. In a photograph from the Nigerian Civil War, which lasted from 1967 to 1970, a lone Nigerian soldier walks past the student center of the University of Biafra. Formerly known as the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, the University of Biafra had been renamed upon the secessionist state's Declaration of Independence, which immediately precipitated the war. In the tension leading up to secession, which included 2 coups within a period of 6 months, massacres and violence against Easterners, particularly the Igbo, swept the north and spread to other parts of the country. Students and academics fleeing this violence were absorbed into the university and became prominent voices in the calls for secession. After Biafra did secede in May 1967, Yakubu Gowon, who had emerged as Nigeria's military head of state after the second coup, declared a police action to keep Nigeria unified. Nigerian forces quickly captured the university and the area around Nsukka by July 1967. Shortly after Biafra's surrender, almost 3 years later, in January 1970, the University of Biafra was renamed the University of Nigeria, and I'll be calling it UNN. Its campus fully opened to faculty and students in September of that year. They had just survived harrowing violence defined by civilian-targeted air raids, famine, and a refugee crisis, and they returned to a campus ravaged by war. Meanwhile, Gowon had announced that the war resulted in no victor, no vanquished. He launched a reconstruction program, but his goal for a swift return to the pre-war status quo necessitated that no official reconciliation took place. By the early 1970s, the repression of Nigeria's recent and violent past had settled over the Nigerian public sphere. Against this backdrop of physical destruction and silence, many returning arts faculty and students had been deeply involved in the war effort. Now they had to make the abrupt shift from being Biafran artists to Nigerian artists once again. To do so, they embarked on creating an innovative artistic program that they used as a means to simultaneously reposition themselves as Nigerians and remember wartime experiences. The pivotal place of UNN's Department of Fine Arts in Nigerian art history has been examined by numerous scholars who have productively explored how the department's curriculum, based on the preeminent modern artist Uche Okeke, who you just heard about in the previous presentation, his conception of natural synthesis, rooted in Uli, created a generative contemporary artistic language. It is through this lens that they have understood such important artists as Okeke Elanatsui, Obioro Dechukwu, and Ndidi Dike. While this is certainly the case, this paper reframes the beginnings of this influential department as a product of Nigeria's immediate post-war environment. It belongs to a bigger project on Nigerian artistic production related to the Civil War, in which I contend that through an approach based on Okeke's conception of natural synthesis, and here you see examples of Uli mural and body painting on one side with a work of Okeke's from the 1970s, and through war-related themes, artists provided visual testimonies of a recent history that the Nigerian government sought to minimize in the name of national unity. Today, I will show how the Department of Fine and Applied Arts' adoption of natural synthesis philosophy based on Uli aligned with the federal military government's post-war rhetoric of unity and diversity. Then I will turn to a work by Obioro Dechukwu, who studied and taught in the department, as an example of how many artists, while conforming to this idea of unity and diversity, utilize their practices to testify to wartime traumatic experiences and their lingering effects in the post-war present. When the war ended in January 1970, the no victors, no vanquished policy meant that Nigeria undertook minimal public memorialization and did not demand apologies from either side for pre-war or wartime atrocities. As Murray Last observed, quote, reconciliation was not so much about canceling hurts as about not allowing those hurts to stand in the way of everyday life, end quote. As a result, an uneasy silence settled over public discussions of the war. In a post-war environment, as Elaine Scarry writes, the antagonistic binary of belligerent equality during war must shift into, quote, the peaceful inequality that entails the designation of one as winner, end quote. Since the Nigerian government claimed that the war resulted in no real winner, no victor, no vanquished, the idea of unity and diversity took hold to attempt to level out this inherent post-war inequality. The slogan had become prevalent in wartime Nigerian propaganda, as we see here, to recognize regional, ethnic, and religious identities while maintaining Nigeria's federal structure. Applied to a post-war environment, it encouraged the coexistence of ethnic and state nationalisms, since the war had been framed as a conflict between the Igbos and the rest of Nigeria. During the war, Uche Okeke had been deeply involved in Biafran nation building. He organized a large-scale exhibition of Biafran art that toured West Germany to raise funds for the Biafran cause. When he was hired as the acting head of UNN's Department of Fine and Applied Arts in 1970, he joined faculty members who also lent their services to Biafra during the war. A.J. Common was the head of the audiovisual unit in the propaganda directorate. Chike Aniakor worked at a refugee camp and wrote pro-Biafran think pieces in domestic and international newspapers, and Chuka Mefuna served as a militiaman, intelligence agent, and soldier. Okeke saw his position as head of department as a means to bring his natural synthesis philosophy based on Uli to UNN. Accordingly, he began to center Nigerian art and Igbo culture in the department's curriculum, with help especially from Aniakor and Amefuna. For example, he stipulated a mandatory BA thesis on an example of Nigerian art history. Students went out into the field to research, often choosing Uli as their subject, as you can see in this excerpt from Obioro Dechukwu's BA thesis from 1972. Okeke also brought Uli into the classroom, as we can see in these examples of student exercises from an Introduction to Design class required of all first years. Many students began to incorporate Uli motifs in their artworks and use Uli's stylistic principles of linearity, geometric abstraction, negative space, and spontaneity to inform their practices.
Rebecca, you have 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okeke's curriculum and artistic philosophy took hold in no small part because it reflected a strong sense of regional identity. As Chika Okeke Agulu has written about Okeke's use of Uli in his development of natural synthesis, quote, emphasizing one's ethnicity reflects a dual gesture at securing one's cultural base and asserting one's claim to the sovereign nation state, end quote. So after the war, artists could claim their belonging in a reunified Nigeria by promoting Igbo culture in line with unity and diversity. Importantly, this embrace of Uli happened within a similar turn in eastern Nigeria at large. As Eli Bentor has found, former Biafrans recognized, quote, that to become part of Nigeria, each ethnic element would have to operate from within its localized sense of identity, end quote, which led to the revival of masquerades and burial ceremonies. UNN artists' Uli aesthetics can be understood as part of this moment of cultural recovery. Furthermore, Okeke displayed his wartime works. Toyota Neke, a student from 1974 to 1979, recalls this work, Refugee Family, hanging in Okeke's head of department office. Ella Natsui also notes that there were several works shown around the department that referenced the war. Moreover, when Natsui arrived from Ghana to teach at UNN in 1975, he could easily see evidence of wartime violence, including an armored tank that remained in front of one of the campus buildings. Physical remnants of the war were present and impossible to ignore. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given this environment, an important undercurrent of artists' work in the immediate post-war decade addressed the traumatic memories of the conflict. As the federal military government discouraged public discussion of the war, these artists worked against the will to forget. Their art, as we'll see in our example by Obiora Ojechukwu, often fused the past and present through the evocation of memory. Obiora Ojechukwu, a prominent student and then teacher in the post-war art department, received his undergraduate degree in 1972, and before that, he was an active participant in Biafran propaganda networks. In Exiles, Facing the Unknown from 1973, we can see how he developed an Uli-based visual vocabulary. As we saw earlier, he wrote his undergraduate thesis on Uli that remembered victims of immediate pre-war violence. In the woodcut, he uses the geometric linearity that characterizes Uli and also incorporates individual Uli motifs, such as these agolago spirals, to depict a couple standing in front of a shallow background of a radiating sun. Flat-roofed buildings common in northern Nigeria situate them as fleeing the 1966 massacres. Ojechukwu himself had become dislocated because of the attacks. He started his university education in the north in 1965, but had to move back east to avoid the violence. He enrolled at UNN in the months leading up to the war, and while there, he spent considerable time sketching massacre survivors arriving at the Enugu train station after fleeing their homes. When he made this print 3 years after the war's end, he was very much aware that he was working through fresh and painful memories. Indeed, his figures' haggard faces speak to the violence that they have witnessed. Ojechukwu utilizes beautifully inspired concentric circles to give their eyes the hollowed appearance of people who have just gone through incredible trauma. The emphasis on the eyes also brings attention to vision as the sense utilized in the act of witnessing. These figures and the artist himself have seen violence and death. They are eyewitnesses for the victims and the vanquished whose memories were threatened by the Nigerian government's post-war policy. This work is further connected to Nigeria's post-war socioeconomic realities. A year earlier, in 1972, the FMG issued what is commonly known as the Indigenization Decree, which transferred economic control of the private sector from foreign to Nigerian hands. It took substantial capital to buy into, and most people in former Biafra were still struggling to regain their economic footing just 2 years after the war. So they were largely unable to participate. Thus, as multiple historians have pointed out, the timing of the decree essentially denied Easterners access to this avenue of economic empowerment. Presenting the violence that immediately preceded the war within the context of this post-war marginalization, Ojechukwu visually argues that Eastern Nigerians continue to be the victims and the vanquished in Nigerian society that Gowon's statement did not acknowledge. He thus testifies to the present continuous trauma and injustice by evoking a violent source of Biafra's secession. While artists like Ojechukwu created artwork with war-related themes and utilized Uli in their compositions, it was not a way to continue being Biafran. Rather, it was a way to claim Nigerianness in the wake of a devastating conflict. In valorizing their regional identity, UNN artists could simultaneously be Nigerian while remembering their wartime history, which became an urgent issue as the government tried to move forward through a policy of forgetting. By resurfacing events and remembrances, Udechuku and UNN artists called for a critical look at the past in order to address the realities of post-war Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening attentively. We have about 29 minutes for questions, so we will take maybe 5 questions at a time, answer them, and then see if we have any more time. So questions, please. Okay, we can start with the first question.
Okay, my name is Soken. I'm a philosopher. I have a PhD. So I'm doing that introduction because my questions may not be regular. Yeah, technical. And your answer technical. Well, these are some of the questions that people have asked. For instance, when Congo sometime last year, and then we went on the tour of the museum, and I found out that many works of art from Africa, Chelsea, this for you, many works of art from Africa, you find out that most of the images, their expressions are always fierce. And this contrasts the work of Odulate that you were trying to look at. Because if you look at it from that angle, there's really a vast difference between what Odulate is doing and what the African sculptures of his time were doing. Yeah, because definitely the satire is there in those images that they're smiling. Then, for instance, when you look at the works of the Queen, the different depictions of the Queen, considering the fact that the British tone is trained in the act of facade, how to show a smiling face and a happy face. Maybe you could use that to evaluate who the Queen is actually, because this Queen is always smiling, whether she's happy or not. That's one of the things I found out. Then when you look at the works of art, some of the critical questions that I ask as a philosopher is, okay, you tell me Mona Lisa is beautiful, or you tell me Michelangelo's David is handsome. And then I wonder who decides that it's beautiful. Is it because somebody has come up and done, some analysis and decided it's beautiful? Everybody is now saying it's beautiful. So those are some of the questions that I would like to ask. But the presentation was quite beautiful. I can't remember your name, but that was fantastic. You really did a good job. Yes, because of the issue of identity. That's one of the reasons why I attended this. I like the concept of identity, which cuts across all the presentations that were being done today. If I have other specific questions, I'll probably come to you and let you know. Thank you very much. Who wants to ask?
We have a question from this meeting, please.
Thank you. My own is more of suggestion or say contributions. And I will start on the work of Dr. Olabode. You made mention of Child Solarin's work on that bridge. In my own view, the reason why Ogun State government commissioned those dignitaries, portraits of the dignitaries, is simply because, one, we still have some level of illiteracy. Most people in the society are not internet compliant to the level that they will have the privilege to go on internet and see the faces of these heroes and heroines. So they have to initiate that idea, commissioning the works to artists and paint their faces on the wall, so that younger generations can actually know this is Iyalode Egba, this is Tai Solarin, and the rest. So that is the purpose. Then you also you mentioned something pertaining to they should digitalize this. Digitalization is very good, but however, it is going to be a gross disadvantage to visual artists, because in terms of those commissioning of those work, artists are getting money from me to sustain themselves as a professional. When such a work is heavily digitalized, what it means is that you are going to chase we artists out of market. Take note of that. Lay emphasis on the importance of those artists getting something benefit from those commissions. Then on your work, money, yes. You see, those stone covers, the pioneer of those stone covers, those works you show us, if they are of this size, 10, 11 inches, they are actually tongue covers. And tongue covers is generated from a very soft wood. It was pioneered by Justus Akeredolu, one of the followers of Aina Nobolu. However, when we are talking about who owns this work, except we have patience, and that is why the work of Bascom is very, very important. When Bascom has a work that has to do with styles in African art, and the reason why they slam all those work African art, fine, there is a work that we can say African art, and I like the way you said it, that individuality matters. You see, in those days they don't sign their works, not because they were not alphabetically letters, but they were creatively letters. Those in the community, when they look at the works of Fakeye, they know this is Fakeye, this is Agbonbiofe, this is they know. And in those days, why they don't sign works is because those works are communal. Individual doesn't acquire works because of the essence of those works. It's meant for religious and political purpose. And they were produced on request, unlike now, because that is one of the major advantage of Western contact with us is the aspect of making individual artists to be a star. You know, they encourage the earlier, our forefathers then, to rely on arts as a means of livelihood. Then, okay, I want to use this. When you group all works together, despite the fact that it was not signed, those works will show there may be controversy if there is no patient, if people who are studying it are not patient enough. The two works, it could be one produced by a master and the other one produced by the trainee, because at that time, when we were not formally trained, people pass through apprenticeship system, do as I am doing. So with that, an apprentice can actually be given the same size of a wood, while the master is carving, he or she will also be doing the same thing. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Omit curiosity. My question is really quite a naive question. As somebody who is not an expert on art history, but I want to find out about these figurines. And I've realized even when I listen to many Western art historians talking about their past, it's like figurines were a thing. Were they also a thing in Africa? And why was the artist, what's his name? Thomas Honor. Did he go to the UK? Why was he making these figurines of Queen Victoria? Or is it because Nigeria was colonized by the British? Or was he moving between the two? Who was he trying? You have rightly said he was trying to impress the white, or rather that's the discussion in the literature. But I'm just curious, were like the artists in Lagos, because Thomas Honor then looks like this posh, or was he? I don't know. I just want to, like, the politics of whiteness and blackness in all these figurines. Yeah, because every time even white people are talking about their pasts, they use figurines, and then Thomas Honor here. So we're like a Lagos artist, a sculpture, was he also using figurines, or they were using other forms, like what our other scholar here, Tai Solari, was talking about, like paintings and that kind of thing? Mm.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll answer all of the 3 or 4 questions together, and then we'll go through another round because we have more comments. Is that all right? Okay, I'll try to answer all the questions briefly. So, Isokan, your first question. Expressions are always fierce when you go to museums. We need to realize that museum spaces are heavily curated. Like you said, Mona Lisa and Michelangelo, these are curated spaces, and that happens in Africa as well. So we shouldn't get into a sort of trap of thinking that what we see in the museum is directly representative of the diversity of art on the continent, right? And this sort of answers the question that you're asking as well, Njoki. African artists, and my work is really interested in seeing how African artists were engaging with Europeans, outsiders, colonizers, because what artists like Odulate realized was they can make money from these people. So he's making work. There were artists who were making work that they knew people wanted to buy. There are also, yes, money is money, right? People want their money. And so what I'm trying to do is that there's a whole category of art that we call tourist art. You know, a scholar here just said that. And scholarship, a lot of scholars haven't paid attention to it because they say it's not real art. So that's what Bascom is saying. It's like, it's not serious Yoruba art. Why should we study it? They're still made by African people. It's still worth studying, right? And because we don't study quote unquote tourist art, we miss a lot of the ways that Africans were actually engaging and reacting against colonization. And so this thought of like, was he mocking them or not? I'm entertaining the thought because if he was mocking them, there's something to look into that. There's a lot of satire in Yoruba art. So what I'm saying, I'm not saying he wasn't mocking them, but I'm saying again, there's no evidence. Like no one has really started his work and said, this is how he's mocking them. They're saying he was mocking them simply because he was creating art of white people. That's, you know, that's very on a very superficial level. And then to answer your question about apprenticeship and individuality, I absolutely agree. When I'm talking about individuals, I'm not trying to say one artist made this one work. If it's made by a workshop, let's at least know that it's made by a workshop. But with Odulate, the problem that I'm getting into is that it seems like some of these works, people are just saying Odulate. Why? If it's made by a workshop, we should still speak about the workshop with specificity and nuance. And with this artist, we're not doing that. And apprenticeship, that's a great point, especially with the bigger sculpture that I've been studying. You know, it doesn't look like it's been made by a master. And so I want to study it to understand. If it's made by an apprentice, again, that's a specific detail that's worth knowing, as opposed to saying, oh, it was just, you know, and the text I read by Henry Druel called him Master Artist Odulate. What makes him a master? Was he ever an apprentice? You know, we can't just leave it there and say, oh, he was a master. Okay, we have more questions. We'll start with your question and then we'll come back to this side. Okay. Hello. Yes, so we're going back, right?
No questions.
It's okay. We need the mic so that Rebecca can hear us. That's why we're passing it.
Thank you. Concerning those art pieces that has differentiation, there's an aspect in art that we need to also integrate into this conversation. There's an aspect that deals with court arts and popular arts. In court arts, artworks were done to satisfy a specific noble, celebrity, or dignitary. The art was not for common people. And that's the reason you see an artwork that will describe a status person. Probably that could be the visitor of the owner of the courtyard. Should the case there are people here who do not know what we mean by court. In those days, there was a large yard, like we have in the Hausa Arewa area. They used to have combination of houses like 10, 20s. with an entrance yard with an entrance house at the beginning. Now, all the composite of that compound are responsible to one person. 10 wives, 50 children, 60 workers, some in the kitchen, some in the... And so that's what may possibly necessitate to the differences in the designs or the beauty of those artworks. Then secondly, you found out that there tends to be two or more standards of preservation in Africa. The one that is typically preserved seems not to be so flashy here. More also, another side to it is even in art, based on tribe and generation, taking cognizance to details also matters. There is a trend, or there's a side of art that does not give cognizance to smoothness of works. And there are some that does, at one generation to the other, and at one, what do you call it, at variations. For example, they made mention of Zaria. We have the Zaria, we have the Ife. They are similar, but there is uniqueness in between them. And so that I want to emphasize on that. Then permit me to pick on Mona Lisa. Somebody was doubting, why was Mona Lisa seriously celebrated? To the best of my knowledge, Mona Lisa had some attributes that are unbelievable. We discovered that Mona Lisa could be seen from either 270 degree or 180 degree, and it will seem as if she's concentrating on you. That's one. Number two, we discovered that she's a queen of a specific emperor. And so that means even before Mona Lisa was printed, Mona Lisa was a celebrity. And so that's that about that. Do I make references to what my Oga spoke about my work? Sorry, ma. Do I make references to what he spoke about my work? Okay. Concerning my work, concerning literacy, accepted, and I'll work on it. Concerning digitalization, I think my explanation was not thorough. My digitalization is keeping records of some of these things, because initially we were not keeping records in terms of in the internet. We have the internet now, you just press something in, it brings out what you want. And that's what my digitalization is inferring to. For example, when you look at travel directory, you see brief history of places and some other things. We are just starting here. We don't have proper documentations. And we have ethnics, let me use the word ethnics or tribes, that has more than 1,000 things to display to the outside world that are tourist attraction. And so if we had them digitalized, it will be well exposed. And that is the area I'm focusing on. I'm not focusing at distorting the natural artistic process. Thank you.
Okay, so this is our maybe last question and see how long.
I think that was a very fantastic presentation. I have a write-up I was trying to do. I've actually done, and the paper has been accepted, and it's something about metaphysical wrappers. So that was why I was interested in the textile part of your presentation. So the question is, did you consider the fact that he was using Dutch wrappers and then to close his artwork? And then how did that impact on the identity of the works of art? No, you answer later. Okay. For Chelsea, I think if you look at the eyes of those works of art, they are not typical eyes that are portrayed in Africa. So, because I think whatever mockery they found out must have been found out on the faces of those works of art and maybe in their eyes. I don't know. Rebecca, okay, so for your work and then the issue of Biafra and war, I don't know, did you consider the subjectivity of the artist involved? Did you consider the fact that the things he was doing them from the perspective of trying to report the Igbo side of the war, or the Igbo feeling about the war? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have the two panelists respond, and then that will be the end of our panel. Let's pass it to
All right, to answer the question, the Dutch Fast was produced in Europe and brought down to Africa and all that. So Yinka Shonibare uses this Dutch Fast print in his work to draw the attention of, it's not even Nigeria, it's British, to draw the attention of Nigerians themselves to these artworks. He's using the artworks as a cross-cultural mingling between the Africans and the Europe to bring the attention of both the Africans and both the Europeans to his work, because he keeps addressing issues of colonial, post and pre-colonial talks and histories of Africa, Black Americans, and so many other history that's what his works are majorly based on. Do I answer the question, Maddie? Is it answered or is it?
we can talk after that. Yeah. Just around the table, please. Rebecca, did you hear?
Yes, yeah. I didn't hear the transition, but is it my turn to?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, definitely. The subjectivity of the artist is a really important part of what I'm thinking about. And I kind of glossed over it in this paper for time purposes. But yes, like Obiora Dechuku is drawing from direct experiences that he had. He was, after he moved to Nsukka, he was a student at Zaria for a year, moved to Nsukka in 1966, and he would travel to Enugu all the time and see people arriving in the Enugu train station who were coming from first the north and then other places in Nigeria that were, coming back east. And so he would sketch them, and his post-war works are direct responses to those experiences that he kind of fleetingly captured in wartime moments that he was then able to return to in more depth in a post-war environment. And yes, for the political aspect of the work, there's definitely a political aspect there. Showing he was incredibly, he's not, one of agitation for Biafran secession today, like not at all, but, he's very much wants to communicate this experience of war that people had, and just really the extreme hardship and the trauma that happened to people. So, and he was greatly involved in Biafran propaganda networks. He did a lot to kind of help Biafra become a reality that it never became. So the political aspect is there to show, this is my experience, to show that, there was, reconstruction and so-called reconciliation, but me and a large amount of people do not feel like that has really, helped us or is working out in a post-war environment the way that government authorities are saying that it does.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your thought-provoking questions and for listening so attentively. Have a nice rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's my one.